shadows and seeds. The community garden sat nestled between two brick buildings, a pocket of green defiance against the urban sprawl of Westbrook. Fiona Darcy adjusted her wide-brimmed hat as she unlocked the iron gate, the morning sun casting long shadows across rows of vegetables and flowering herbs. At 26, she had found her calling in an unconventional therapy practice, botanical healing for those carrying invisible wounds. "Good morning," she called to Matteo, the groundskeeper who was already tending to the irrigation system. He waved back, his weathered face crinkling into a smile. Today marked the beginning of the garden's newest program, Growth Through Grief, designed specifically for those who had experienced profound loss. The local hospital had referred several patients, and Fiona had prepared for weeks, studying each case file with care. "First one arrives at 9, Matteo reminded her, checking his watch. "The private donor's friend, I think," Fiona nodded, feeling a flutter of nervousness. The program had received a substantial anonymous donation last month, enough to keep it running for years, with the single condition that one particular participant be accepted immediately. At precisely 9, a sleek black car pulled up outside the gate. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door, but no one emerged for several long moments. Finally, a tall man in his 60s stepped out, his posture rigid, his expression vacant. Gray hair swept back from a high forehead, and deep lines etched the corners of his eyes. He wore expensive clothes that somehow seemed to hang off his frame, as if he had recently lost weight. "Mr. Reed," Fiona approached with a gentle smile. "I'm Fiona Darcy, the botanical therapist who will be working with you." Harrison Reed barely nodded, his eyes scanning the garden with detached interest. "I don't need therapy," he said quietly, his voice carrying the hoarseness of disuse. "My doctor insisted, said I needed to get out of the house." Fiona had encountered this resistance before. "That's fine. We don't have to call it therapy. Think of it as spending time in a garden with someone who won't bother you with too much conversation." A flicker of relief crossed his face. "Would you like to see where we'll be working?" she asked, gesturing toward a secluded corner of the garden where a small greenhouse stood, surrounded by raised beds of lavender and rosemary. Harrison followed silently, his footsteps hesitant on the stone path. Inside the greenhouse, Fiona had set up 2 workstations with simple tools, seedlings, and pots. "Today, we'll just get acquainted with the space," she explained. "Feel free to explore, touch the plants, smell the herbs. There's no right way to do this." Harrison stood awkwardly, hands thrust into his pockets. Fiona recognized the paralysis that often accompanied profound grief, the inability to engage with even the simplest tasks. "Perhaps I could use your help instead," she suggested, picking up a watering can. "These seedlings need attention." She handed him the can, and after a moment's hesitation he took it. His hands trembled slightly as he tilted it over the small plants. "My wife used to garden," he said suddenly, the words emerging like they surprised even him. "Roses, she had dozens of varieties." Fiona nodded, not pushing for more. "We have a rose section on the eastern side. Not as extensive as your wife's collection, I'm sure, but they're quite beautiful when in bloom." Harrison set down the watering can. "When did she die?" "Your file must say 8 months ago," Fiona replied honestly. "Cancer." "Eleanor fought for 3 years," he said, running a finger along the edge of a leaf. "I built an empire while she fought alone." The raw guilt in his voice made Fiona pause in her work. "Would you like to plant something for her? Many people find it helpful to grow something in memory of someone they've lost." For the first time, Harrison truly looked at her, his blue eyes focusing with intensity. "What would you suggest?" he asked. "Something that blooms year after year, a perennial that returns, even through the harshest winters." Harrison considered this. "Yes," he said finally, "I think Eleanor would like that." For the remainder of the session, they worked side by side, preparing a small plot for memorial planting. Harrison spoke little, but his movements became more deliberate, more present. As their time ended, Fiona noticed his shoulders had relaxed slightly. "Same time on Wednesday?" she asked as they walked toward the gate. Harrison paused, looking back at the greenhouse. "I suppose I've committed to this program." "Just give it 3 sessions," Fiona said. "After that, if you feel it's not beneficial, no one will force you to continue." As his driver opened the car door, Harrison turned to her. "You're very young to be doing this work," he observed. Fiona smiled. "I've found that plants don't care how old you are, only how much attention you give them. People aren't so different." Something that might have been the ghost of a smile flickered across Harrison's face. "Wednesday, then," he said, and disappeared into the car. As Fiona watched the vehicle drive away, her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate and best friend, Olivia Winters. "Lunch today. Need to talk about Dad's upcoming charity thing." Dreading it, Fiona texted back a quick confirmation, unaware that the threads of her life had just begun to intertwine with Harrison Reed's in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Asterisk roots taking hold. The community garden transformed in the late afternoon light, golden rays filtering through the trellises of climbing beans and casting dappled shadows across the pathways. Fiona sat at her wrought iron table outside the garden cafe, watching her best friend Olivia pick at a salad. "I just don't understand why I have to be there," Olivia sighed, pushing a cherry tomato around her plate. Dad's foundation events are always full of people trying to impress him or get his money. It's exhausting. Fiona studied her friend's face. At 25, Olivia Winters carried herself with the poised confidence that came from growing up in privilege, but beneath it lay a vulnerability few people ever saw. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, highlighting the sharp angles of her face that she'd inherited from her father, whom Fiona had never met. "When was the last time you actually spoke to your dad?" Fiona asked gently. Olivia's expression clouded. "Christmas, maybe. A 5-minute phone call." She set down her fork. "After Mom left, he just retreated into his work. The mighty business tycoon, too busy building his legacy to notice his daughter graduated college." "The foundation gala could be a chance to reconnect," Fiona suggested. Though she knew the rift between Olivia and her father ran deep, that's not how the Winters family operates. Olivia replied with a bitter laugh. "We stand side by side in photos, donate obscene amounts to charity, and pretend we're not strangers." She shook her head. "Anyway, enough about my dysfunctional family. How's your new grief patient?" Fiona hesitated, always careful about discussing her clients. "He's resistant, but there was a moment today when something changed. He mentioned his late wife." "That's progress, right? It's a beginning." Fiona smiled. "Sometimes planting the seed is the hardest part." 2 days later, Fiona was surprised to find Harrison Reed already waiting at the garden gate when she arrived. His driver sat in the idling car nearby, but Harrison stood alone, watching a pair of finches dart between the trees. "You're early," Fiona remarked, unlocking the gate. "I don't sleep much anymore," he replied simply. As they walked through the garden, she noticed his gaze lingering on the various plants with more interest than before in the greenhouse. Fiona had prepared several clay pots and a selection of perennial seedlings. "I thought we might plant those memorials we discussed," she said. "I've brought a few options." Harrison studied the small plants with unexpected intensity. "Which one is the most difficult to grow?" Fiona raised an eyebrow. "Probably the delph. They're beautiful but temperamental. They need significant care." "Then that's the one," he said decisively. Eleanor never shied away from challenges. As they worked side by side, filling pots with rich soil and carefully transplanting the delicate seedlings, Fiona was struck by the change in Harrison's demeanor. His movements were more deliberate, his focus sharper. "You mentioned building an empire," she ventured carefully. "What kind of work do you do, Mr. Reed?" His hand stilled momentarily. "I founded Reed Innovations. We started in sustainable technology, then expanded." He said it without pride, as a simple fact. "And please, call me Harrison. Mr. Reed makes me feel every one of my 62 years. Fiona nodded, recognizing the name of one of the country's largest tech companies. "And what did Eleanor do?" A genuine smile softened his face. "She was a concert pianist, talented beyond measure. She gave it up when we married, though I begged her not to." The smile faded. Another regret in a long list. "It's never too late to honor her passion," Fiona suggested. "Many of our participants fund music programs or scholarships." Harrison's hands moved methodically, pressing soil around the delicate plant. "Perhaps, though I found that throwing money at guilt rarely alleviates it." The honesty of his statement hung between them, unexpectedly raw. "Why botanical therapy?" he asked suddenly. "It seems an unconventional choice for someone your age." Fiona's fingers traced the edge of a leaf. "My grandmother raised me after my parents died. She had a magnificent garden. It was her therapy during her grief, and it became mine. Plants teach patience and resilience. They respond to care without judgment or expectation." Harrison nodded slowly. "And your education? This seems like specialized work." "I have a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in horticultural therapy," she explained. "I'm hoping to complete my doctorate eventually, focusing on trauma recovery through environmental connection." "Hoping?" Harrison caught the hesitation in her voice. Fiona shrugged lightly. "Education isn't cheap. I've been saving, but between rent and student loans." She trailed off, not wanting to burden a client with her financial concerns. Harrison said nothing more about it, but she noticed him watching her more intently as they completed their work. As they finished planting the memorial delphinia, Harrison stepped back to observe their creation. "What now? Do I make a wish or say a prayer?" Fiona smiled. "Whatever feels right to honor her memory. Some people name their plants, others write letters to place in the soil. It's a personal choice." Harrison stood in silence for several long moments. Then, almost imperceptibly, he whispered something to the plant, his lips barely moving. Fiona turned away, giving him privacy in the moment. When he finished, he looked up with clearer eyes than she'd seen before. "The same time Friday?" he asked. "I'll be here," she promised. Later that evening, Fiona sat cross-legged on her apartment floor surrounded by textbooks and research papers, her laptop balanced precariously on a cushion. The apartment she shared with Olivia was small but comfortable, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in botanical prints and photographs. "Still at it?" Olivia asked, emerging from her bedroom in pajamas, her hair wrapped in a towel. Fiona rubbed her eyes. "Just reviewing some case studies for a paper I'm working on." Olivia flopped onto the couch. I got another email from Dad's assistant about the gala. Apparently I need to coordinate my remarks with the PR team. She rolled her eyes, as if I'd embarrassed the great James Winters. Fiona looked up sharply. James Winters? Of Winters Enterprises? The one and only, Olivia conferred with a grimace. King of tech innovation and absentee parenting. Fiona's mind raced. Reed Innovations and Winters Enterprises were major competitors in the tech industry. The coincidence of having connections to both was unsettling. You never told me your dad's first name before, Fiona said carefully. Didn't I? Well, it hardly matters. He's more Mr. Winters than Dad anyway. Olivia reached for the remote. Want to watch something mindless to distract ourselves from our problems? Fiona nodded, pushing aside her books and the uneasy feeling taking root in her chest. As the television flickered to life, she couldn't help wondering what Harrison Reed would think if he knew she was best friends with his competitor's daughter. More troubling still was the question of what these powerful men might do if they discovered the connection. Some secrets, like certain seeds, were best left buried until the right time for them to emerge. Unexpected blooms over the following weeks. The delphinium seedling under Harrison's care flourished unexpectedly. Like its caretaker, the plant seemed to grow stronger with each session, its stems reaching upward with renewed purpose. You have quite the green thumb for a beginner, Fiona remarked one Friday morning as Harrison carefully measured plant food for his growing memorial. I'm good at following instructions, he replied with a hint of a smile. That had become more frequent lately, and I may have been doing some reading between our sessions. Fiona raised her eyebrows. Botanical research. I'm impressed. Harrison adjusted his glasses, a surprisingly humble gesture for someone of his stature. I've built my career on understanding systems. Plants are just another system, complex and fascinating. As they worked, Fiona noticed the transformation in Harrison beyond just his interest in gardening. The hollow-eyed man who had first entered the garden 6 weeks ago had been replaced by someone more present, more engaged. His clothes fit better, and the permanent furrow between his brows had softened. I've been thinking about what you said, Harrison mentioned as they moved from the greenhouse to work on a community vegetable plot, about honoring Eleanor's passion. Fiona handed him a trowel. And I've established a scholarship for young pianists at the conservatory where she studied. 5 full scholarships annually, with living stipends. He spoke matter-of-factly as though announcing the weather forecast. Harrison, that's wonderful. Fiona's genuine enthusiasm made him duck his head slightly. It's what she would have wanted. Music brought her such joy. His voice grew softer. I didn't appreciate it enough when she was alive how she could transform a room just by sitting at the piano. I was always focused on the next deal, the next acquisition. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic scrape of tools against soil creating its own gentle music. There's something else, Harrison said eventually. My company's charitable foundation is hosting a gala next Friday evening. I'd like you to attend as my guest. Fiona paused. Trowel me there. Me? Why? The foundation is announcing a new initiative supporting innovative therapy programs. Your work here exemplifies exactly the kind of project we want to fund. He cleared his throat. And selfishly, I'd feel more comfortable having someone I know there. These events are challenging for me. I'd be honored, Fiona replied, touched by the invitation and the implied trust, though I don't exactly have gala-appropriate attire in my closet. Harrison waved away her concern. The invitation includes a styling appointment at Lumiere. Eleanor always said they were the best in the city. Just call the number on the card and they'll take care of everything. Later that afternoon, Fiona stared at the elegant invitation in her hand, the embossed Reed Foundation logo catching the light in her apartment. The gala was scheduled for the exact same night as the Winters Foundation event Olivia had been dreading. Her phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Emergency shopping trip needed. Dad's assistant says my usual black dress lacks appropriate festivity for the gala. Kill me now. Fiona's thumbs hovered over her phone screen, uncertainty making her pause. She hadn't mentioned Harrison to Olivia by name, always referring to him simply as her grief therapy client. The coincidence of both foundations holding events on the same night was troubling, but perhaps not surprising in the competitive world of tech philanthropy. Can't this weekend, she replied finally, swamped with research papers. Rain check. The lie sat uncomfortably in her stomach as she set down her phone. The following Tuesday, Fiona arrived at her university campus early, hoping to speak with her doctoral advisor before classes began. Professor Daniels had a reputation for being on campus at ungodly hours, and today was no exception. Fiona, come in, the professor called when she knocked on his office door. At 70, Edward Daniels remained one of the most energetic faculty members, his enthusiasm for botanical research undiminished by decades in academia. I wanted to discuss my research proposal, Fiona began, settling into the chair across from his cluttered desk, and some complications with my funding situation. Professor Daniels sighed, removing his reading glasses. I was afraid of this. The department's budget cuts are hitting everyone hard. Your work is promising, Fiona, but without external funding. I know, she said quietly. I've been looking into grants, but most deadlines have passed for this academic year. Have you considered approaching any of the tech foundations? They're flush with cash and eager to support innovative projects, he suggested, making air quotes around the word. Fiona hesitated, thinking of Harrison. Actually, I've been invited to a foundation gala this Friday. Reed Innovations is announcing a new therapy initiative. Professor Daniel's eyebrows shot up. Reed Innovations. Harrison Reed himself. Yes, I've been working with him in the community garden program. He's become quite invested in botanical therapy. The professor leaned forward. Fiona, this could be a tremendous opportunity. Reed is notoriously private, especially since his wife's passing. But his foundation is one of the most generous in the field. If you've made a personal connection, it feels wrong to leverage a therapeutic relationship for funding, Fiona interrupted, the discomfort evident in her voice. I understand your ethical concerns, Professor Daniels said gently, but consider this. If Reed believes in your work enough to invite you personally, he may already be considering supporting it. You wouldn't be exploiting anything by discussing your research in an appropriate setting. Fiona nodded slowly, still uncertain. Speaking of Reed, the professor continued, have you seen the news this morning? There's quite the industry buzz about the gala. Apparently, Winters Enterprises announced their own event on the same night, a deliberate counter-programming move. According to the tech blogs, Fiona's heart sank. I hadn't heard those two have been rivals for decades. Professor Daniels chuckled. Started their companies around the same time, competing in similar markets. There are rumors they were once friends, if you can believe it. The professor's words echoed in Fiona's mind as she left campus later that day. The thought of being caught between these two powerful men and their long-standing rivalry made her increasingly uneasy. Friday evening arrived with a flurry of activity. The gown provided by Lumiere was more exquisite than anything Fiona had ever worn, an emerald silk that complemented her auburn hair, with delicate embroidery resembling twining vines across the bodice. As promised, Harrison's driver arrived precisely at 7, delivering her to the Grand Botanical Gardens where the gala was being held. The historic greenhouse had been transformed for the evening, with thousands of tiny lights woven through exotic plants and trees, creating the illusion of a star-filled forest. Fiona spotted Harrison immediately, standing somewhat apart from the crowd, looking distinguished in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. When he saw her, something in his expression shifted, a momentary softness that quickly composed itself into a polite smile. You look lovely, he said as she approached. That garden suits you. This place is magnificent, Fiona replied, gazing up at the soaring glass ceiling where climbing vines had been artfully arranged. Thank you for inviting me. Harrison offered his arm. Allow me to introduce you to some people who might be interested in your work. The next hour passed in a whirl of introductions to Foundation board members, potential donors, and medical professionals. Fiona found herself repeatedly explaining the principles of botanical therapy, surprised by the genuine interest her work generated among the elite crowd. You're a natural at this, Harrison murmured as they momentarily stepped away from a group of enthusiastic hospital administrators, at what, making people believe in possibilities they hadn't considered before. There was genuine admiration in his voice. It's a rare talent. Before Fiona could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A latecomer had arrived, causing a ripple of whispers through the crowd. Winters, someone nearby muttered. Bold move, showing up here. Harrison's body tensed beside her. James, he said, his voice suddenly cold. Fiona followed his gaze to the entrance where a distinguished man in his early 60s stood scanning the room with calculated confidence. James Winters, Olivia's father, had the same sharp features as his daughter, his salt and pepper hair cropped short in a style that screamed power and precision. But it wasn't James who made Fiona's blood run cold. It was the young woman beside him, looking uncomfortable in a sapphire blue gown that matched her eyes that were now widening in shock as they locked with Fiona's across the crowded room. Olivia, in that moment, as Harrison's hand unconsciously tightened on her arm and Olivia's expression shifted from surprise to confusion to the beginnings of betrayal. Fiona realized that some secrets, like certain plants, emerged whether you were ready for them or not. As Olivia's gaze darted between Fiona and Harrison, a flash of recognition crossed her face. The room seemed to shrink around them, the ambient chatter fading to background noise. Excuse me, Fiona whispered to Harrison. I need to, know her, Harrison stated rather than asked, his eyes narrowing as he observed the silent exchange between the women. Before Fiona could respond, James Winters approached with deliberate steps, Olivia trailing reluctantly behind him. Harrison, James nodded coldly. Quite the spectacle you've arranged. Though I believe our event across town has drawn the more influential crowd. Harrison's posture stiffened. James, I don't recall sending you an invitation. I go where I please, James replied with a dismissive wave. Besides, I wanted to see firsthand what Reed Innovations considers philanthropy these days. The tension between the two men crackled like electricity. Fiona glanced at Olivia, whose face had gone pale. And who is this? James turned his attention to Fiona, his gaze evaluating. Before Harrison could introduce her, Olivia stepped forward. This is Fiona Darcy, she said, her voice strained. My roommate and best friend. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison's expressions shifted from confusion to comprehension to something unreadable. James merely raised an eyebrow, suddenly more interested. Your best friend, Harrison repeated slowly, looking at Fiona with new eyes. Yes, Fiona confirmed, her heart racing. Olivia and I have been friends since university. I didn't realize until recently that you and Mr. Winters were rivals. Enemies, James suggested with forced lightness. How fascinating that our worlds should intersect in such an intimate way. Harrison's jaw tightened. Fiona has been working with me in a therapeutic capacity. She's a botanical therapist at the community garden. Recognition dawned on Olivia's face. You're his grief counselor, the one you've been telling me about for weeks. Fiona nodded miserably. I didn't know who he was at first, and then it became complicated. Indeed, James said, a calculating smile spreading across his face. How very complicated. One might even call it a conflict of interest. That's enough, James, Harrison said sharply. This isn't the place for your insinuations. People nearby had begun to notice the tense exchange, whispers spreading like ripples in a pond. Fiona felt her professional reputation hanging by a thread. Perhaps we should continue this discussion somewhere private, she suggested quietly. Harrison nodded, gesturing toward a side door that led to a smaller conservatory. The four of them moved away from the crowd, leaving speculation in their wake. In the relative privacy of the orchid room, surrounded by exotic blooms, the full weight of the situation descended. How long have you known? Olivia demanded, hurt evident in her voice. I suspected when Harrison mentioned his company, but I wasn't certain until recently, Fiona admitted. I should have told you both, but I was worried about breaching confidentiality and I was afraid of exactly this situation. A convenient excuse, James remarked coldly. One might wonder if you orchestrated this connection. Harrison shot him a withering look. That's absurd. Fiona has been nothing but professional and helpful in my recovery. Your recovery, James repeated with a hint of mockery. Always the dramatic one, aren't you, Harry? Don't call me that, Harrison snapped. You lost that right decades ago. Olivia looked between the two men, confusion replacing her hurt. You know each other. I mean, beyond being competitors. A heavy silence fell. Finally, Harrison sighed, suddenly looking every one of his years. James and I were friends once, partners, actually. We started our first company together out of a garage in 1985, until he stole my software design and walked away with our biggest investor, James added bitterly. That's not how it happened. And you know it, Harrison countered. You wanted to take the company in a direction I couldn't support ethically. I had no choice but to start over. Always the self-righteous one, James scoffed. And now you've dragged my daughter and her friend into our ancient history. Olivia's eyes widened. Is that why you've been so distant all these years? Because of your feud with him? James had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. Business and personal matters are complicated, Olivia. You wouldn't understand. I understand perfectly, she replied, her voice suddenly steady. You let your bitterness poison our relationship. You pushed me away because I reminded you of your failures. The rawness of her words seemed to cut through James's arrogance. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. Harrison turned to Fiona. Did you know about all this when you agreed to work with me? No, she said firmly, meeting his gaze. I knew Olivia had a distant relationship with her father, but she rarely spoke about him. I had no idea about your shared history. Harrison studied her face, then nodded slowly, accepting her words. Perhaps, Fiona continued carefully. This is an opportunity rather than a catastrophe. An opportunity, James echoed skeptically. Yes, you've both spent decades nursing old wounds and building walls. Maybe it's time to consider what you could accomplish by working together instead of against each other. She glanced at Olivia, and perhaps rebuild some personal bridges as well. A long silence followed her words. Harrison was the first to break it. Eleanor always said I was too stubborn for my own good, he said quietly. She would have appreciated the irony of this situation. James's expression softened slightly at the mention of Eleanor. She was always the reasonable one between us. She told me once I'd regret letting pride dictate my life. Olivia stepped closer to her father. It's not too late to change that. For a moment, the years of animosity seemed to waver, like heat rising from summer pavement. I propose a compromise, Fiona suggested. Both foundations are announcing therapy initiatives tonight. What if instead of competing programs, you created a joint venture? Imagine the impact you could have together. Harrison and James exchanged long looks, decades of history passing silently between them. Perhaps, Harrison said finally. Not tonight, but ... perhaps. James nodded reluctantly. We could discuss possibilities. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a beginning, a tiny seed planted in fertile soil. The garden unveiled. The aftermath of the gala revelation rippled through the following weeks like stones cast in still water. The tech blogs buzzed with speculation when Harrison Reed and James Winters were seen leaving their respective events early, only to be spotted an hour later in deep conversation at a quiet restaurant downtown. For Fiona, the professional consequences came swiftly. Professor Daniels had called her into his office the Monday following the gala, his expression grave. The ethics committee has questions about your dual relationship with the Reed and Winters families, he explained. They're concerned about potential conflicts of interest affecting your doctoral research. I understand, Fiona replied, her stomach knotting. What happens now? Best case scenario, a formal review and probationary period. Worst case, he didn't need to finish the thought. Now, 3 weeks later, Fiona sat on a bench in the community garden, watching a monarch butterfly dance among the milkweed. The garden had become her sanctuary during this period of uncertainty, the one place where growth and healing remained visibly possible. Mind if I join you? Olivia stood nearby, casual in jeans and a sweater, so different from the uncomfortable elegance she'd projected at the gala. Please, Fiona patted the bench beside her. Their friendship had been strained but not broken by the revelations. I had lunch with my father yesterday, Olivia said as she sat down. First time in years we've been alone together without his assistant hovering nearby. How did it go? Olivia plucked a leaf from a nearby plant, turning it over in her fingers. Awkward, painful, necessary. She smiled faintly. He actually apologized. Fiona, I don't think I've ever heard him say I'm sorry before. That's a significant step. He told me more about the early days with Harrison, how they were like brothers once. They coded side by side for days without sleep, shared terrible apartments, dreamed big dreams. She shook her head. It's hard to reconcile that story with the Cold War they've been waging my entire life. People build walls when they're hurt, Fiona observed. Sometimes those walls become so familiar they forget there was ever anything else. They sat in companionable silence, watching bees move methodically from flower to flower. Harrison's been asking about you, Olivia mentioned casually. Dad says he's been uncharacteristically distracted in their meetings. Fiona felt an unexpected warmth in her cheeks. I've been giving him space. The ethics committee strongly suggested I recuse myself from his therapy. That's unfortunate for Harrison. Apparently, the memorial plant you helped him start is thriving in his home office. Dad says he talks about it constantly. A small smile tugged at Fiona's lips. I'm glad it's doing well. They're actually going forward with the Joint Foundation initiative. You know, Olivia continued, they're calling it Roots and Branches, supporting innovative therapy programs across the country. She nudged Fiona gently. Your idea is becoming reality. Before Fiona could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The delphinium has new buds. Eleanor would say that's a sign of hope. Would you consider meeting for coffee? As friends, not therapist and client. Harrison Reed. Olivia caught sight of the message and raised an eyebrow. Well, it seems my father isn't the only one making new beginnings. A harvest of healing 6 months later. On a crisp autumn afternoon, the community garden hosted the official launch of the Roots and Branches Foundation. What had begun as a tentative truce between old rivals had blossomed into something neither man could have anticipated. Fiona stood near the refreshment table, watching Harrison and James give a joint interview to a technology magazine, their body language still somewhat stiff but noticeably more relaxed than it had been months ago. I never thought I'd see those two in the same room without lawyers present, Olivia remarked. Appearing beside Fiona with 2 glasses of champagne, she handed one to Fiona. 2 unexpected outcomes. They clinked glasses, both thinking of how much had changed since the night of the gala. The ethics committee had eventually cleared Fiona of any deliberate impropriety but placed her doctoral research under additional supervision. The scrutiny had been uncomfortable, but the unexpected result was a substantial research grant from the new foundation, allowing her to expand her work to multiple community gardens across the city. Did you see the announcement about the scholarships? Olivia asked, gesturing toward a display board where the foundation's first initiatives were outlined. Fiona nodded. 10 full doctoral scholarships for research in therapeutic applications of environmental science. It's incredible, and completely inspired by your work, Olivia pointed out, though I'm sure Harrison's influence had nothing to do with it. Fiona felt herself blushing again, something that happened with embarrassing frequency whenever Harrison was mentioned. Their coffee as friends had led to dinner, which had led to long walks in the botanical gardens, which had led to conversations too deep and personal for public spaces. At 62, Harrison was slowly rediscovering how to live again. At 26, Fiona was learning that healing sometimes came from unexpected connections. Their relationship defied easy categorization, not quite romantic but deeper than friendship, built on mutual respect and understanding. Your father seems different, Fiona observed, watching as James actually laughed at something Harrison said. He is, Olivia confirmed. We're talking more than we have in years. He's even coming to my gallery opening next month. She worked as a photographer, specializing in urban nature, finding beauty in unexpected places, and he mentioned Eleanor for the first time yesterday, said she would have been proud of what Harrison has accomplished with the garden programs. Across the garden, Harrison caught Fiona's eye and smiled a genuine, unguarded expression that still surprised her when she saw it. He excused himself from the interview and made his way toward them. The journalists want a statement from the botanical therapy pioneer, he said to Fiona. I told them you'd be happy to explain the science behind the success stories. Fiona straightened her shoulders. Of course. As she stepped away, Harrison called after her. "We're still on for dinner tonight. I have something important to discuss." The something important turned out to be an offer not just for Fiona, but for everyone involved in the community garden program. Harrison and James had decided to expand the Roots and Branches initiative internationally, establishing healing gardens in hospitals and trauma centers worldwide. They wanted Fiona to head the research division, developing new therapeutic approaches and training practitioners. It would mean traveling, Harrison explained over dessert, establishing programs in different communities, adapting the methods to various cultures and environments. "It sounds incredible," Fiona admitted, her mind already racing with possibilities. "There's one condition," Harrison added, suddenly looking uncertain. "I'd like to come with you, not as your boss or benefactor, but as your partner in this venture." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I've spent too many years letting opportunities for connection slip away." Fiona turned her hand to clasp his. "I'd like that very much." Later that evening, as they walked through the night-blooming section of the botanical garden, Harrison stopped beside a particularly magnificent delphinium display. "When Eleanor died, I thought everything that mattered had ended," he said quietly. "But life is persistent. It finds ways to grow, even in the most unlikely circumstances." He looked at Fiona, his eyes reflecting the soft garden lights, like a friendship between a grieving old businessman and a young therapist who saw past his walls, or like two bitter rivals finding common ground after decades of conflict. Fiona added. Harrison nodded. "Healing isn't about returning to what was before. It's about growing something new from what remains." As they continued their walk, Fiona reflected on the unexpected journey of the past year. What had begun as a simple therapeutic relationship had expanded to touch many lives. Harrison finding purpose beyond his grief, Olivia reconnecting with her father, James discovering that vulnerability could be strength rather than weakness, and for Fiona herself, the discovery that sometimes the most powerful healing happens when we allow ourselves to be both the gardener and the gardener, others, while remaining open to growth ourselves in the quiet evening garden, surrounded by plants that had witnessed centuries of human joy and sorrow. That seemed like the most natural truth of all.